Welcome to Making the Grade, the podcast that explores what's driving the decline in graduation rates between funding rounds and what it really takes to scale a venture-backed software startup successfully with realistic options to exit. I'm Tom Glasson, CEO at Scalewise, and each week I'm going to be joined by founders, investors, and some of the best go-to-market leaders in the world to unpack the strategies, the missteps, and the mindset shifts that separate those who graduate from those who don't. Expect real talk, actionable go-to-market insights, and honest stories that will help you scale more wisely and thrive in an increasingly competitive market. Because there is a smarter way to scale, and we're here to uncover it. In the startup ecosystem, there are a few truths that never change. Scaling is definitely harder than it looks. Overhiring can kill momentum of your business, and knowing when to hand over the CEO reins might be the hardest call of all. In this Making the Grade episode, we're going to be diving into all of it, from building a go-to-market function that actually works, to finding your niche in a $500 billion market, to preparing your business and yourself for a smooth leadership transition. Again, I'm joined by Munya Hoto and our very special guest and also Scalewise client, Edwin Bartlett. Ed is a repeat founder who's built and exited multiple companies and most recently founded and led Hicomply, one of the fastest growing cybersecurity startups. And in this episode, Ed shares how he's kept his team lean, how he's embraced experimentation in go-to-market, and why stage-fit leadership is critical for sustainable growth. This conversation is a bit of a blueprint for every founder looking for a realistic exit, and why most founders don't get there. So Ed, welcome to Making the Grade. How are you today?
Very good, Tom, Munya. Yeah, really looking forward to the session today. And life is good right now.
Amazing to hear. Well, maybe to start us off, maybe give us a whistle-stop tour of your career to date and maybe take us on the journey that brought you to where you are today.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, so I was actually, this year is my 30th year in business, I guess, graduated in 95. I know I don't look it, Tom, but just making that point. But anyway, 30 years. And interestingly, I've got a complete split, 15 years in property and real estate and 15 years in tech. So I've kind of got a real split career path. But actually, when I think back, even to when I was at university, I kind of had that tech vibe, that desire to do something in tech, even to the point that I was like the only student on my course that had a laptop. I used to rent it out at weekends and kind of get goods in return for leasing out that laptop. And I think, I always saw opportunity, even in that 15 years in the real estate space. I was always looking at building tools and apps and, even trying to work out ways of creating apps on things like the Scion Palm Pilots and the HB Compacts, iPacks that people probably don't even remember. So there was always kind of, even though I was working in the real estate space, was looking at tech, and that kind of interest is what got me into tech, because I spotted an opportunity which really led to the foundation of a business called HiCloud back in end of 2010, when there was just an obvious need in the surveying industry to build some technology for doing surveys and inspections in real estate. So that's kind of where it feels like the 15 years I had in real estate was kind of the groundwork for my career in tech, but I kind of moved into it in my 30s. So probably not your typical tech start, probably a little bit later than most. But I think that gave me a different perspective. So HiCloud went from 2010 to an exit end of 17 to a business called Accruent. Accruent was then acquired 8 months later by a business called Fortive. So I kind of had a second exit experience with that. Had a little bit of time off, not very much. Well, I'm sure we'll get into it. It's very easy just to think that when you exit a business, you're gonna take some time off, but it just never happens. So I rolled into Hicomply during COVID and been involved in that business, still involved in that business, but now looking at a couple of other things as well. So kind of, in whistle stop, 30 years in doing what I'm doing, but very much a tech experience.
Tell us a little bit more about Hicomply. Where did the idea come about? And why did you decide to build again? And where are you currently on in that scaling journey?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think all of the best tech ideas, concepts come from experiences in other businesses. So, Hicomply very much came out of the experiences we had around in HiCloud when we were trying to win business with major enterprise customers. And we kept hitting really tough hurdle, which was, love your product. It's an amazing product, very innovative, but is if I use it, is it secure? Is my data going to be secure in your platform? So we really realized that actually, if we're getting asked these questions, every tech business in any sector is going to be asked these questions. So we started to think about this idea probably back in 14, 15, but we were busy building KaiCloud. So we just put the idea to one side. And then once we'd been through that exit in kind of back 1920, when we started looking at kind of other opportunities, my co-founder from KaiCloud, a guy called Nick Graham, CTO, had done a lot of work in the concepts. It's kind of really his baby, this one. Whereas I'd say KaiCloud was probably my baby, whereas Nick's probably the real driving force behind Hicomply. But when we got into it, it was clear that, there's definitely going to be there's an opportunity here. And in terms of, thinking about where we're at so far, we are very much capitalizing on what's happening in the cybersecurity space. I think we could see cyber was on the up. You can see what's been happening in the last few weeks. It's all over the press. It's everywhere. M&S, Adidas, God, where do I stop? It co-op every day. There's something happening in the cyberspace, major corporates getting hit. So we're kind of solving that problem. We're helping those businesses protect their information security. So where we're at, we really got going. Go-to-market really started early 22, I'd say. I mean, we were planning through 21, but 22 is when we really got moving. So as of today, we've got something like 20,000 users in the platform, pretty much across the globe, from the US, Canada, Far East, Europe, predominantly UK. So we're kind of 4 years in, 3-4 years in, and we're in a good kind of foundational phase of growth and scale. So we've got the business to that kind of, product market fit, decent ARR. We're now looking at putting investment in to really, really push hard. And I'm sure we'll get into it, but that involves obviously kind of reskilling the team and bringing fresh legs and fresh resource into this to really push us forward.
Ed, first of all, congratulations to you. That is not an easy thing to pull off, and to have kind of multiple exits under your belt is, I think, the envy of many, many founders and CEOs that we speak to. So amazing work there. What would you say has been the most challenging part of building Hicomply to date, and what helps you get through it?
It's a tough one. This because I think any founder you speak to, if they deny the challenges, they're kind of living in dream world. But the biggest challenge initially was we were starting this business off the back of COVID, so we had, they were all problems around people and getting offices and getting the business moving, and we kind of very quickly pivoted to a remote business operation, and that was hard because I think most of the team had always worked collaboratively in a space together. So we had to learn whole new ways of working. And I had a bit of experience of that in the US with my second business. So I kind of got used to working remotely. I'd worked on a business within a crew, and we had people in San Francisco, Minneapolis, Austin, UK, and the team was really diverse. So I found it okay, but I think a lot of people struggled with that. So I think, and I think we still do struggle with that. Most businesses are struggling with that. So that was kind of the operational challenge. I think the other challenge is it's like an interview question. The biggest challenge is also the biggest opportunity with this business. So cybersecurity is such a big market that it's such a big opportunity that it's also difficult to really focus into the specific area that you want to go, because you can't, even the most heavily best funded businesses in the cyber world, there's some big players. Businesses like CrowdStrike, the kind of fundamental multi-million-dollar operations, multi-billion-dollar value businesses, even they have to pick their kind of thing and stick to it. Otherwise, you're just going to blow your marketing budget. So, yeah, I think getting kind of making sure we're very focused because we're in the cyberspace. That's probably the other big challenge we have.
Well, Ed, I'd love to dig into that a little more, because as you said, it is a massive market. And I remember when we initially met, you talked about the size of the TAM in terms of the companies that actually could have a need for Hicomply. And it was, it's a real range from actually relatively small companies up to very large enterprises. And we often talk to founders who either kind of go too broad too early, or just kind of fail to establish a strong enough foothold in a defined segment. Maybe you can share a bit more about how you approach finding your niche and the opportunity that you've identified.
You're never starting from scratch. Find an industry that's similar and where people have had a segment, a niche down in the same way. And I can give an example of that. But just if you take a step back, cybersecurity is equivalent in size to to the defense industry. You know, there's a lot of talk at the moment about people spending 5% of GDP on defense. We will be spending 5% of GDP on cyber, right? That's kind of where this world is ending. You know, it's not, we can't ignore it. And you might even argue that cyber and defense are the same thing. But latest estimates that cybersecurity as a whole is a $500 billion TAM, right? Estimates taking that to $1.5 to $2 trillion within the next 5 to 10 years. So it's just a phenomenal industry. So how do you've got to break that down. So what we've identified is within that, there's a big niche, which is the GRC software. So governance, risk and compliance software. The TAM of that subsector is something like 50 billion. But within that niche, there's also another segment, which we would call security compliance, which is really where we play. And probably the TAM in that space is probably in the kind of anywhere between 5, 10, 15 billion. So even though the segmented, broken down version, there's still a lot to go at. And the way I mentioned before about kind of looking at other industries, the industry that I have used as kind of the benchmark here is the HR software industry, because, you know, HR is part of the big ERP, you know, finance, HR, business, you think of the bigger play. But when you think about, there's some really good HR platforms that people are now run their HR operations, and InfoSec is very similar to HR. It's kind of an essential thing that you didn't need it. You didn't really need software for it, but now you wouldn't do HR without software, right? And in the same way, I think you wouldn't do InfoSec without software. So I think it's quite similar to the HR industry that lives within ERP, which lives in that kind of big space. But yeah, I mean, we've broken it down, and just take the UK, probably, well, you know, if you look at company house data, 5 million businesses in the UK, but the ones that are probably in the kind of SAM, you know, if you think of your TAM and your SAM, the SAM is probably 300K, right? 300K businesses that are big enough, have enough employees to want to do something, that have a need because they've got an operation that requires it. So yeah, in the UK alone, we're talking about, you know, 300,000 companies to go at, right? And then you triple that for the US market. So, you know, there's 1 million businesses globally that could buy this product. So even though it's it's a niche, it's a big niche. But, you know, again, that comes back to how do you tackle that, and how do you compete in a market where people are throwing a ton of cash at that?
I'd love to dive into that a bit more detail, because you talked about the size of the market in the US relative to the UK. And I know the US is an interesting market for you, but also there is some, you know, well-funded competitors out in the US as well. How are you seeing the differences between kind of how you build and scale within your niche in the UK versus some of the competitors in the US? What are the dynamics you're seeing there, and how you're thinking about that?
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, this was something we spent a lot of time in when we were doing the original business plan, and obviously investors were really keen to understand this. But, you know, in the UK, there's maybe one other serious competitor in our space. There's a couple in Europe. There's a couple out in Australia, Asia. There's one out in India. There's about 6 in the US, right? Of those 6 in the US, the average fundraise across them is probably $200 million. Comparing that with the average fundraise of a kind of UK business, which is probably going to be more like 5 million. So you've got businesses that have raised $300 million versus businesses that are raising 5. But we are competing with those businesses still. And I think that's kind of that's the thing I think about UK tech is we always do so much more with less capital. We're much more capital efficient. We're not driven by how many staff we've got, how much funding we've raised. It's the results are what matter. And I think, so even though we've got those really well-funded businesses, we kind of don't care because their business model is so different. The other thing that's quite interesting about the US providers is they've really focused on building partnerships with the likes of Amazon, Microsoft, Google, kind of your big tech. They're relying on the big tech and the marketplaces through those big tech providers. But the reason they're doing that is because they effectively are sharing opportunity in business. So 4 of our competitors in the US, if you buy their product, what effectively it does is it increases your cloud hosting costs because it puts more demand on your cloud hosting infrastructure, which is much more beneficial to those cloud hosting providers. So they're kind of symbiotic with each other, that they're helping each other out. Whereas I think in the UK, the prospect of a business buying some infosec technology is going to increase their hosting costs for no reason at all. It's kind of like, we're not going to do that, and absolutely. So we've kind of we're very vanilla. We're not attached to any big tech partnerships. We have partnerships, but we're not pushing business into big tech in the way that some of our US competitors are. But I think that's just the US business model in tech, is they're always looking to kind of drive, they need, because they've raised so much capital, they need the relationships with big tech to kind of get in a volume going. Whereas we don't need that. We by all means, we want to compete and we want to have as many customers, but we can do it a different way. So I think we are different. And I think as the other thing I'd add to that is, the US businesses are very US orientated in terms of their approach to security. We've got a much more international European spin. So our product is very much focused on international standards and European standards, whereas the US tech providers really struggle to get their head round some of that, because you can put an office in Dublin or the UK and you can employ a team, but I think fundamentally they still struggle with understanding the culture and the product need of our market. And I think that's our unique advantage, is that we really kind of understand the market that we operate in. But yeah, it's an interesting dynamic for sure.
And you touched on there, Ed, the fact that you've kind of deliberately, I think, kept your team quite lean, which I think for a VC-backed startup kind of goes against the grain in a world where growth often gets mistaken for headcount. I think it's a really interesting choice that you've made there, especially in go-to-market, where many founders overhire before there's a clear playbook and product market fit. We see that all the time in Scalewise. Can you maybe just share a bit more about why and how you made those decisions to keep the team as lean as you have?
Yeah. Interestingly, we do follow, we follow kind of the US lean startup mantra, probably more than most US businesses do. I think we've seen what we can achieve with that. And I think it's because we've built a very capital efficient business with our first business, and I built a second. It just feels like the right way to do it. And I think, but also I think it's also driven by the investors that we're working with in the UK, Tom. They're different in their outlook. They're much more focused on, not necessarily getting to profitability, but they don't want businesses to be burning cash forever. They want to see some at least break even cash generative, operations. And I think they're just expectation, UK investors that have a slightly different view, and that kind of steers your thinking as well. But ultimately, I mean, I actually think what's happening in tech and you look at what's happening in tech and AI, the size of the teams, and the speed of, it's much more around speed of execution than it is about how much capital you raise. Actually, I think the more capital you raise, sometimes the slower you work. So with the product, we might have a smaller dev team, but our dev team is super focused on what our customers are asking for. So we're building product and releasing product very, very quickly, and we're very responsive. And I think we can be much more responsive around marketing. We don't need an executive marketing committee to decide whether we're going to change content on the website or rebuild it. It gets done. Someone makes a decision, and that day it happens. And I've worked in bigger tech businesses, even maybe, talking about Accruent, who acquired us, in maybe 200 million revenue outfit. You've got large teams. You've got 5-6 layers of software sales operations, and marketing. There's approval structures all the way through. You've got separation of teams. And I just think if you're going to move fast in a market that's moving fast, there is an advantage on having a smaller team. I mean, don't get me wrong. I'd like to have more capital and I'd like to go to put more in, but I don't think it's always an essential.
One thing I've kind of found fascinating about your approach is, I suppose, how intentional you've been about your go-to-market build, both in terms of roles, but also kind of the approaches and the tooling. Founders often get quite swamped here, kind of unsure what to prioritize, whether to go outbound heavy, PLG, partner-led, or some hybrid of that. It seems to me you've built a kind of multifaceted go-to-market function and supporting tech stack. Maybe you can share more about how you approached it and any advice for fellow founders listening that are currently building maybe their go-to-market function from scratch.
Yeah, I think it sort of going back to the UK US thing. I think if you think back to what we've just been talking around about capital efficiency, I think you've got a lot of opportunity in in GTM at the moment, GTM technology. So if you look at the tech stack initially, the beauty of what's going on in the market now is there's new tech products in the marketing stack coming out every few months. And the product that was doing really well 6 months ago is already looking a little bit tired in the market. So I think being nimble and being lean around your GTM and the tech, we've experimented with everything. We've tried every tool in the market, right? We've got HubSpot, we've got Gong, we've got Outreach, we've got Zoom Info, we've got, and we're looking at, at any point in time, we're probably looking at about 3 or 4 other things that we can bolt in and maybe replace one of those things out. So, I think that's where we've got the advantage is we can, and certainly we've got new people coming into the business who've used other tools, have got experience and bringing new ideas to that all the time. So there's kind of I think the GTM, a lot of the tools and data, from a data point of view, quite US centric. So sometimes you find that, for a UK market, they don't always fit. I think from a GTM point of view, it's fair to say we're using AI based tools across the stack, from everything from demo recording, call recording, conversation intelligence through to, summarization of conversations through to outreach campaigns themselves, content. So we're experimenting with AI in every area. I will say I'm not a fan of kind of whole scale AI outbound SDR tools right now. I don't think they're ready for market. Sorry for anybody who's listening in that space, but I think it will come. But I just think it's got so much work yet it'll happen quickly, no doubt. But again, I'm not sure it's there yet. But I think the other key thing, Tom, I think is that, outbound is alive and kicking, right? I think people have realized that with all that tech, with all that AI, the one thing that you still need to do is get people on phones, speaking to people. But the critical thing the technology is starting to do, and I think it's finally, thank God, finally giving us real signals and real intent that we didn't have before. So all that technology, for me, the best thing about the technology is the intent and the signal data that's given us. And I think that was always the challenge in previous businesses I've worked in. Like, it was really difficult to know where that intent was coming from. So I think, in terms of kind of the stack, I think if you're building it from scratch, I'd definitely experiment. Don't tie yourself into 3-year deals on these products. Take them on trials for 6 months and then roll them for another 6 months. Just, knit things together, try things out. To make all that work, you need somebody in your team who's got, either in the team. We use combination of people in the team and consultants to kind of pull all that together. But you need people who know how all that works and have kind of been there as well. I think that's a key. The talent piece is critical to that working.
Completely agree, Ed. And the phone is not dead. In fact, I think the phone has made a big comeback when it comes to outbound. But I 100% agree with you. AI SDRs are not a thing yet. I don't think they're a thing in the short to medium term. I've seen a lot of companies get burned, putting a lot of hope and expectation on AI SDRs. And I mean, you only have to look at the churn rates of some of these companies as well, in the 90%. Where companies are trialing them for 3 months, not seeing the results, and then ditching the tools. So your advice around taking 3 months trials, I think, is also a wise one, because there's a lot of hype, there's a lot of people selling a dream and a hope. But actually, when you implement it and you start using it, some of these tools really don't live up to expectations.
Ed, I'm a big believer in the kind of principles of experimentation. In fact, it's a big principle at scale-wise when we do diagnostics, that, post the diagnostic, the next phase is experimentation. We hypothesize around what we want to do, right? What we believe might be the growth levers of an organization or a team. And so I love that, you've made that point. Outside of GTM, what are some of the lessons that you're bringing to Hicomply that you've taken from previous scaling experiences?
Yeah, I think coming back on what you just mentioned there, I think there's definitely tools and techniques that, certainly I've used. And actually on my whiteboard behind me here, I have a permanent jobs to be done framework that is all about identifying, not just identifying the ICP, but it's identifying the pain points, is identifying and understanding the jobs to be done on a functional, social, emotional, like, how do customers feel when they use your products? How do they look in front of their colleagues when they use your product? Like, what are the real drivers? So I think that's one thing that every time I talk to a new business, the big gap, and I think the big lesson that I've learned brought in is you've really got to understand the ICP and really go to town on on that, and really drill it. And I think the jobs to be done framework is a really nice one. There are others, but it kind of layers in lots of different components together. And it's certainly when I was in the forklift business, they very much pushed a lot of those kind of innovation techniques. And I think leading on from that, once big lesson, once you've identified your kind of hypothesis of who your ICPs are, you got to go out and test that. You shouldn't be building any product at this phase, right? You're still understanding the market. And I think people are led to build a product way too early. That's another lesson learned. You build wireframe and build and prototype for as long as you possibly can. And I think that's something that our CTO at Hicomply, Nick, is just an absolute master. He'll build it when it's the right time to build it, and he'll only build what needs to be built. He's very, 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 very efficient in that. And I think that's a skill, an absolute major skill. Most businesses don't have that skill in their businesses. But yeah, once you've got that kind of hypothesis of who the ICPs are, as much kind of voice of customer work as you possibly can do. Certainly with Hicomply, we probably spoke to first phase at least 50 companies, and just put sketches, wireframes in front of them, talked about the concept, brought a friendly consultant, information security consultant into the room as part of that conversation, so they could kind of understand we weren't just some tech outfit looking to make a fast dollar. We kind of understood the market. But I think a lot of businesses don't do enough of that, and I think that's something that we've really brought into this product. So I think that what that means is, ultimately, coming back to the lean thing, we're building the right product, and we validated the product. So therefore we don't need as many people because we're not building product that doesn't need to be built, right? And I think I would say most of our competitors, some of our competitors have only just added features that we've had in the product for 2-3 years, because they didn't, they didn't talk to their customer to understand what was really needed. Most of our customers, for example, don't have a decent risk assessment kind of methodology built into the tool. It's kind of a fundamental of what we do, but there are products in the market that just don't have it. Their products shouldn't exist in the market. So, they must be getting churned to hell. But I think as well, on top of that, I think the other big learning for me would be remembering we're a SaaS operation, having as much, I think, Tom, I know your kind of business, and you very much you very much follow the winning by design framework, understanding that the success isn't the sale, the success is the growth of that customer. 50% of the success of the business will come through expansion and growth of your existing customers. And I think understanding the NRR dynamic, bringing that understanding into this business was really important. And don't get me wrong, we've had our struggles with that, and it's not easy. And actually, we've had injection of experience and talent recently into Hicomply that's really pushed us forward in that area. But yeah, making sure we understand it's software as a service. You only get the expansion if the service is good. The product's got to be great, excellent. It's got to be unbelievably good. But if the service isn't there, people aren't going to expand and grow their needs. So I think definitely ICPs, as much VOC as you can do, and definitely a massive focus on expansion and NRR. And the service. Those are the kind of 3 key things I would definitely say we brought into this business.
Oh, Ed, they are some incredible lessons that you've taken into it. I love how close you've been to the customer as part of that product development process as well, which I know that many founders don't necessarily get that voice of the customer, as you put it, right into the heart of that process. But I think one of the harder things for repeat founders is probably knowing what to carry forward and what to leave behind. That tension between kind of confidence and baggage, I think, is quite real, and it's easy to perhaps even get in your own way. How do you ensure that you don't take the baggage, in inverted commas, from your previous scaling experiences into your new venture while still taking the important learnings with you?
Yeah, it's a really tricky one, that. I think things are different. The key bit of baggage is, I think you've got to not take is we did it this way before, and of course it will work. And I'll give you a good example of that. With KaiCloud, we probably spent maybe $2,000 a month on Google PPC and generated a huge amount of inbound lead activity from $2,000 a month, like phenomenal ROI. In our space, $2,000 will buy you very little, right? So, you can't, I think you've got to kind of not just roll a proven kind of marketing GTM approach from one business into the other. So I think you've got to kind of almost unlearn a lot of the metrics. You've kind of almost got to recreate the metrics to say, you got to test whether it's still valid. Except that most of what you think you knew is no longer relevant, right? So you got to be prepared to relearn. And I think that's really difficult for a founder second time out, because you think you know it all. And I think as well, a good way of kind of isolating that is just talking to as many founders that you can, who are kind of maybe one or two steps ahead of you. I always really, when I'm going to any network event or anything, I'm always looking for the founder that's maybe the next step up in the journey, and seeing what they're doing, understanding what's working for them. And I think that's really important. It's difficult to do that in a safe space, in a safe environment. So it's kind of like you kind of surround yourself with people. So, I think the other bit of baggage is don't think that you've got all the answers. Definitely be open to listening and talking. And the other bit of baggage, I think, is probably when you go through growth and you go through an exit, you have some tough experiences, with term sheets, with caps tables, with exit kind of mechanics, preferences, all the things that you don't really know until it happens, right? People don't read the documents. People don't, investment agreements and share purchase agreements, and founders think they know what's in those documents. The reality is most of them don't. So what happens in most exits is there's a bit of reality hits you of like what all this means, and it normally kind of takes money out of your pocket, right? So you've got to kind of leave that behind, but you've got to very much go into the next one like with your eyes open. So whenever I talk to founders, I'm like, look, before you even think about exit, make sure you kind of understanding the documents. But I think being prepared to relearn, Tom, and not being stuck, nothing worse than hearing a founder go, with my last business, we did it this way and it worked. Why isn't it, and then the reality is it's not working this time, and they're scratching their head. But I think we've all been there.
Ed, let's look ahead. So much of the founder journey is about balancing personal ambition with business momentum. And that, I think, can easily get lost in the race to hit that next milestone, especially when you're VC backed. By the time this episode airs, the news will likely be public, but for now, it still feels like it's a bit of breaking news and maybe something you haven't even talked much about yet openly. We'd love to just explore what's next for you at Hicomply, especially given your recent decision to step down as CEO.
Yeah, it's really interesting stage. I mean, I'm kind of in a transitional phase from my own point of view, which something I'd always planned. I mean, if I go back to this, when we originally put the concept together for Hicomply, I was part of the team as a non-exec. Nick and the team approached myself and said, look, Ed, like we've got, this idea is great. Can you help us put the business plan, help us put the business plan together? Can you put the pitch deck together? So I was kind of like in that, I said like, yeah, I'll take some equity. I'll help put this together, raise the investment. I had a lot of contact in the investor community, but because of the challenging conditions coming out of COVID, immediately we started talking to investors, and they're like, the only way we're going to fund this is if, Ed, you're CEO of this business, and you're in it till it's a kind of foundational stage. So the plan was always to do that and follow through with that. Probably taken a little bit longer than maybe I'd expected, but not a problem. So yeah, I'm kind of moving into a board observer role, non-exec board observer role, still very much an investor in the business. But again, the critical thing with that, guys, was actually the business. It wasn't appropriate for me to kind of make a move like that unless I had somebody to really step into the and backfill and do the job. And actually, coming back to what we were talking about before, it wasn't about somebody just doing the job. It was about somebody who had the experience to take the business from where we were to the next phase. And certainly we found that individual. Mark Edgeworth joined us on a fractional model. He joined us, obviously, you helped us with that process. Mark came on board in December. We had a very busy Christmas, got stuck into the business. But within 2-3 months, Mark absolutely loved what we were doing. And immediately I could see he was the obvious candidate, and very super, super capable, huge amount of experience. And again, being able to find somebody in the market like that isn't easy. So we grabbed the opportunity to pull Mark in full time. He's now doing that joint CEO, CRO role. I'm going to help in terms of business strategy, help out with the investor relationships. Obviously, all being well, moving towards an exit position at some point in the future, whenever that might be. Not a kind of timeline focus for us, but we know it could happen. So having the preparation in place, working with our chair and others in the team to make sure that the business is properly positioned. But yeah, I mean, I love businesses at that early stage. And like, I've taken three tech businesses from kind of 0 to 1 plus and are helping many more. So yeah, I'm working with a number of other businesses at the moment, looking to support them in that phase of, really the early stage, but also understanding kind of the exit process.
That's great, Ed. And, really, really delighted that we were able to play a role in obviously finding Mark as your fractional CRO, who's now transitioned into the CEO gig, giving you the ability to really focus on what you love and what you do best, which is, as you say, that earlier stage and supporting and advising companies around cyber and the risks that they might face. So really, really pleased that this next chapter is about to start for you. So as we start to wrap up the show, as you know, Ed, this podcast is called Making the Grade. It's all about helping more founders get from one funding round to the next successfully. But the data is pretty bleak. Graduation rates are falling really off a cliff in recent years. You've navigated multiple ventures through that tricky terrain. So I'm curious just to get your take. What do you think needs to happen to improve the graduation rates in startups?
Oh, it's really difficult. I think there's kind of a foundational skills thing. I speak to a lot of schools, and my own son is aspiring to be a software developer, and he's done his placements with a number of good, he's writing code. He's got on his CV, he's got a depository of all the little apps he's built. But when you go into schools, there are people who have got that skill set. They're obviously going to be computer science, professionals, but actually what people aren't really understanding and pushing into the education process is that in a tech business, the software development piece is only 1/5 of the business. You've got sales, you've got marketing, you've got finance, you've got customer focus. Sales, tech businesses are operations like any other business. And so I think tech needs to be positioned as not as a tech software thing. It needs to be positioned as it's the foundation of our economy. Schools don't get that yet, and they're not promoting that. So I think there's kind of a real change in position. And hopefully I'm starting to see some kind of some good people coming into government and policy who've actually got experience in this. And I think that's going to change, but it definitely needs to. I think the one thing that will improve graduation rates is just improving that talent pool, but also businesses just getting better at how they access the talent and how they bring the talent in and picking the right people for the right. So I guess that's why you do what you do and we do what we do. There's a massive opportunity and a massive market in that space because people don't do it very well at the moment. So I think there's a big talent. There's kind of a skills thing. There's a talent thing. And I think the other thing is obviously the investor pool. And there's still a lack of investors in the UK in early stage businesses, in particular, because they don't really want to take that risk anymore. There used to be more. I think actually the number of early stage investors, I haven't got the data on this to prove it, but it just feels like there are less investors in this space now. But yeah, I think there's a lot we can do there to improve the graduation rates. And, if you look at the stats, is it 90% of businesses don't get to that 0 to 1 phase. And then of the ones that go from, 1 to scale up, again, it must be a very small percentage again. So, and then the challenge is that people that have done that are busy doing the next one. they don't, and there's just a small pool of those people that they don't really have the time. So it's important that the skills of those individuals is captured somehow. And that's kind of why I'm doing what I'm doing going forward. Is I think there's a lot to give there, and actually it's good. It's actually fun, actually working with businesses because there is a playbook, right? There is a playbook for success. So yeah, making sure that is kind of more widely dispersed. I think the US is much better at that. I think the UK is very insular and very kind of regional. We get so caught up in the UK about London or Manchester or Cambridge or, the different tech hubs all being the best tech hub when, like, who cares? Like we're competing with US businesses. Like it should be the UK, let's talk about the UK tech scene, not the Manchester tech scene or the Newcastle tech scene. So yeah, I think there's another, we've got to be much more wider thinking we're in a global economy with a global marketplace. We have to operate like that. So yeah, that's kind of a few key things I'd throw in there, Tom.
Ed, you've been very generous with your time, and I could mine you for nuggets, I think, for the whole day. If you had to pick, your biggest piece of advice for founders looking to exit in 25 and beyond, what would that be?
Yeah, I think fundamentally, if you're looking to exit in 25, make sure you've done the prep. The investors or acquirers have very, very tough DD requirements now. So make sure you've really done your homework on, making sure your revenue recognition policies are all in place. You've got the right structure to how you're presenting your finances. You've done your code audits and reviews, that you're not using open source ChatGPT AI code that you shouldn't be using to build your product. I know there's a lot of push to use an AI to write product, but a lot of it isn't open source, commercial license grade stuff. So you've got to make sure you understand. So I think if I was exiting, I would get hold of a typical DD process that an investor or buyer is going, and basically run a shadow DD on yourself. Make sure that and this is kind of like the infosec. Do the internal audit. Audit yourself before you go into the process. Make sure you've done that first, and there's plenty of people out there that can give you that guidance about what to look for. And something that I'm certainly very, very much involved in conversations with other businesses on. Yeah, make sure you do it. Don't go into an exit process where it's the first time that you've thought about some of these issues, because you'll either, the deal will come off the table, the value is going to be chipped back, or, worst case, you could find yourself in a position where somebody exposes something that your current investor doesn't like. So you've really got to do the prep. And it doesn't involve a huge amount of work, but it's really important that you start that early.
Ed, thank you so much for joining us on Making the Grade today. It's been a genuinely insightful conversation, not just into the specifics of building Hicomply, but also I think just the mindset and strategic shifts that come with being a repeat founder. Thanks again for being so open about not just the highs, but the challenges and the learnings that you've picked up along the way. We're definitely rooting for Hicomply's continued success, and even more importantly, your next chapter as well, as you take on I'm sure many and varied challenges in other companies as well. So thank you so much again, Ed, for joining us today.
Thanks, Munya. Thanks, Tom. Really good to talk. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to Making the Grade. We really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any questions following this episode, or you'd like to recommend a guest perhaps for our next season, please let us know at podcast@scalewise.com. And if you did enjoy today's episode, please do consider leaving us a review on either Apple Podcasts or Spotify. We'd really appreciate that. As this is a brand new show, reviews really help us spread the word and reach new listeners. Plus, we'd also love to hear what you're enjoying about our show. Thank you so much for your support, and see you soon for another episode of Making the Grade.